Good afternoon, or good evening rather. Welcome to another episode of JM Cause Podcast. Hit that like button and that post notification button so that you can get all the content that is coming down the pipeline readily available to you. Apologize, got a little tongue twisted there. So tonight we're going to be speaking about, and I was going to make a video and just kind of put it on there, but I figured that I'm going to go ahead and live stream this tonight so that we could go over some things that are taking place right now. As you know, that we have the whole story with Keith Davis, Tupac Shakur, and if Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is actually going to put out a warrant for Keith D. Now today, we're going to go down memory lane, and we're going to go over a few things that are going to make complete common sense for you, and you're going to start to understand that this story that Greg Kading spells out to the general public is false and is a lie, and I'm going to give you the reasons why. And you're going to, and when I tell you this tonight, you are going to definitely open your mind. So we're going to go back as a refresher to September 7th, MGM Grand, Tupac and his entourage. The attack, Orlando Anderson, okay? Now, there's been much speculation over time, and the stories seem to grow like tall tales about a chain getting snatched from somebody at a Foot Locker, where we kind of don't know what the truth is on that. We have people who have speculated that it is a truth, and then there's others that say it never existed. So that has been the problem with this case, all in all, is that we never seem to get the full truth, and we get a lot of half-truths. But, as I mentioned before, we have the Southside Crips, Keith D, Orlando Anderson, DeAndre Smith, Terrence Brown, okay? And you're going to see what is going to be taking place here. And just so I can make sure that my audience is listening, my family, can you hear me out there? If somebody can go ahead and type in that so I can make sure that this record is a good record so that we don't just waste our time listening to nothing. Anybody out there can let me know about that. Anybody. Can you hear me? Can you hear? Okay. There you go. Thank you. So, it just hit me today like a ton of bricks, and nobody really talks about this, about the case, Tupac Shakur. So again, Greg Kading comes out, writes a book, gets a confession from Keith Davis, and boy, oh boy, are you guys in for a doozy tonight. You're going to think about this tonight long and hard, and you're going to ask yourself, if you do believe the murder rap narrative, you're going to question yourself, okay? So, again, in the last videos, we talked about Orlando Anderson gets beat down, and supposedly he comes back, retaliates, and shoots Tupac Shakur and kills him, okay? But as we mentioned before, he lives for another 2 years, doesn't get caught slipping at all for 2 years, and then finally gets killed by somebody else that's unrelated to Death Row Records. We have Keith D, who goes into the proffer session, tells Greg Kading that he saw Suge Knight shoot. He saw Suge Knight when Orlando Anderson shot. He looked at him in his eyes, so he knows. So Suge Knight knows, supposedly, if Keith D was in the car. Okay. So now, going back out now, Keith Davis says this, and here we go. This is where you're going to open your mind. Keith Davis lives for 20 years. Plus, he's still alive. He's the last guy standing. He lives for 20 years plus. He even tells the story to Greg Kading in 2011. So Suge Knight knows this whole time, supposedly, if Orlando Anderson shot him and Tupac. He knows this, theoretically, right? He knows this. Suge Knight never does anything. No one ever does anything to Keefe D for 20 plus years, and you probably have an argument here, and you say, well, does Keefe D let his guard down after 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years, 10, 15? Because you know that Suge Knight, he basically was still out and about all this time after all this supposed big gang war happened right after they killed Tupac, supposedly, the Southside Crips. So Keefe D just lives 20 years plus, still alive. No one touches him. No one's caught him slipping. Nothing. Terrence Brown, same thing. In the car, doesn't get caught. And you're going to ask yourself, well, how do they know that he was in the car? Well, if they were bragging, as it's mentioned by Murder Rap, they went bragging, Orlando Anderson was bragging, and they were all bragging about it. The streets, remember the streets? Nobody hears them. Nobody says anything. Nobody does anything. Nobody. Terrence Brown lives. DeAndre Smith lives. They all live for 20 plus years except for Orlando Anderson. So if we go back to this chain snatching incident, they beat down this guy for a chain. And not only that, we back up and go to Monkey Man, who didn't want to return a car to Suge Knight and ends up getting kidnapped and getting shot, but gets away and then goes to start a war with Mob Piru. So if they're willing to do this for a car and they're willing to do this for a chain, they're not willing to do it for Tupac Shakur after all this time. And it was fresh. The war, if there was a war in Compton, as Compton police, 2 white officers and the Compton PD said that this is a gang war going on, Mob Piru and the Southside Crips, because of Tupac Shakur. And if this is going on, they go after all the wrong guys. Even after the streets have said this, right after it happened, that they all knew that all these 4 guys were involved in this crime. And none of them get killed. Not even after, not even a year later, not even 5 years later. So I'm sure you're getting my point here. My point here is that the Southside Crip narrative, killing Tupac Shakur, in my opinion, is false. And the reason it's false is because the 4 guys that were in the car didn't get touched. None of them. None of them got touched. Even after Keefe D came out and said, because there were still 2 of them alive after Keefe D came out and told a story. None of them got touched. Death Row had a lot of power, and nobody went after these guys. So what makes sense to me is that Keefe D was telling a story to Greg Kading. And the reason why was because Greg Kading's main focus and main agenda was to absolve any involvement by any police officer. Going from the Rampart scandal, and you can't believe that these guys that were in the Rampart scandal, even Kevin Gaines, were honest police officers, because they weren't. They were for hire. They were stealing drugs from evidence lockers. They were stealing drugs from drug dealers. They were shooting drug dealers. And most importantly, they were working for Death Row Records. They were on the payroll. And there's evidence of that. And we go back to the whole Kevin Gaines thing. In my opinion, that's what I believe killed Tupac Shakur. So Greg Kading has to come in and he has to redirect the investigation that Russell Poole started to make gains on. He started to figure out that David Mack, Rafael Perez, Kevin Gaines, all had a connection to Death Row Records. David Mack with the whole Biggie incident, getting caught with the Gecko ammunition, getting caught with the radio scanners, and all this stuff was hidden in his house. And he had the shrine of Tupac, and you can go out there and you can look at that picture of it. There's another YouTuber that has posted that. So with all this, and Kevin Gaines, as I mentioned, with the glossy in his locker, and he was dating Sharitha Knight, and I'm sure at some point him and Suge Knight had a falling out because of that. He was on the payroll. It's been evidenced. It's evidence that that's what happened. So again, going back one last time, and they just hit me like a ton of bricks today. I was thinking to myself, wait a minute here. We've been looking for all these outlandish theories of who killed Tupac Shakur when it's been sitting right under our face for the longest time. Orlando Anderson gets killed later. Yeah, I get you. David Mack is on Facebook. He's living an average life. Where's the $722,000 at? That's the question I have. So again, we're going back to everything that happened that night. Ask yourself again. Orlando Anderson doesn't get killed for 2 years. DeAndre Smith doesn't get killed for 20 plus or under 20 years. Keefe D still alive, the last guy standing. And when is it that when someone comes out and confesses to a murder, this is outside the proffer session. So how come Las Vegas Metropolitan PD is not jumping up and putting out a warrant for this guy and arresting him? Because he told everything. And you got to remember that Corey Edwards said that him and Orlando Anderson went to Club 662 to get a fair one. Not to shoot anybody, to get a fair one. And in my eyes, a fair one is a fight. It's not a gunfight, because there's no such thing as a fair gunfight. So these guys, they don't get killed for 20 plus years. But guess who does get killed? Kevin Gaines gets killed by Frank Liga. And I say to myself, does Frank Liga and Suge Knight have a connection in some form or fashion? Who knows? We'll never know. We'll never know. But there again, that's the main focal point tonight. Do I think that they have footage? Well, it's a possibility. Why is it they're not investigating it? How come they're just not coming out and saying, hey, let's go get Keefe D. Let's go get him. There has to be something that doesn't allow them to go and arrest Keefe D. I think it's the whole story is going to fall apart because police officers were involved in the murder of Tupac Shakur, which I say Kevin Gaines was the one who killed Tupac. And David Mack, Amir Muhammad, and Rafael Perez were involved in some form or fashion to assassinate Biggie Smalls in Los Angeles. Definitely. No one's ever identified Poochie Faust, ever, but they've all identified Amir Muhammad as being there. There's been people that have identified David Mack and Rafael Perez being there the day before, kind of doing a scouting mission or whatnot. Who knows if they have the footage? I couldn't tell you if they do. But there's something underlying here that says, hey, we can't go get Keefe D because there's something else going on here. Greg Kading came in, read a book. Everybody believes it. He's laughing all the way to the bank. If Keefe D doesn't get arrested for this, then you got to ask yourself, what's going on? I mean, who could commit a murder and say, I did a murder and get away with it? You got to ask yourself, there's something else going on there. The Poochie Faust theory is bull. And if you look at the footage, and there's a really good, and I'm going to actually put that footage out later on. There's actually a really good HD quality footage that shows two people getting in that parked Impala outside of the Peterson Museum. There's two people. There's one that goes in really quickly from the driver's side, but there's one that goes into the passenger side right before Notorious B.I.G. pulls out. As soon as Notorious B.I.G.'s Suburban pulls out, that's when the driver jumps in the car really quickly, and that's when they're parallel to the Suburban, and they shoot into the car with Gecko ammunition. Then nobody ever else got caught with Gecko ammunition except for David Mack. And Greg Kading comes out and says that in his book that there was other people that had Gecko ammunition. Nobody, when they did the raids, Compton PD did the raids, nobody got caught with Gecko ammunition. Not one single person. The only person that got caught with it was David Mack. Now, what are the odds of that one person being caught with Gecko ammunition and nobody else getting caught with it? You got to ask yourself that. Anyhow, that's the podcast for tonight. Think about it. Terrence Brown lives. Orlando Anderson lives. Keefe D lives. Terrence Brown lives. Nobody gets touched. But these were the guys that the streets said were the ones that were involved in killing Tupac Shakur. The only guy who dies that there is a connection to with him taking time off during that period is Kevin Gaines. That is the show tonight. Think about it. You have the opportunity to believe what you want to believe, but I'm spelling it for you. The four guys who said did it all live. The one guy who has a picture of Tupac and Suge in his locker and is Sharita's boyfriend ends up getting killed. As I mentioned before, folks, I'll be coming up with new content. And as I always tell you all, always seek the truth, no matter where it takes you. Have a good night, folks.